All right, everyone. I'm sorry to interrupt your great conversations here, but I have good news for you. Al wanted me to make sure you all knew that there's plenty of time to continue the conversations because we have the room well past dinner. And beyond that, we have Ark Sandberg here, and it's his room, so I don't think they're kicking us out. So you will have plenty of time to resume. So my name is Vanu Bose. It's my privilege to be your MC tonight and introduce you to some interesting folks. Couple housekeeping things. So we will have a few speakers now while you're eating your appetizers. We're going to break so you can enjoy dinner and have your conversation. And a few speakers after dinner who will bring you aspects of Al's life that have nothing to do with academics or signal processing. and then we're going to stick around for as long as we can. So personally, I've known Al since I was 5 years old. Al was my dad's very first PhD student, and I would come in with my dad every Sunday. He'd play badminton in the Armory with a bunch of graduate students. And one day we're walking out, and this guy comes walking the other way holding a squash racket. And my dad introduces me to his former student, who's now a professor. You know, I'm like a 5-year-old kid, and professors are like these big people. So I'm thinking, that guy's a professor? He doesn't look old enough to be a grad student. Come to think of it, Al, you don't look old enough to be having an 80th birthday party either. So tomorrow's going to be very serious about the future of signal processing. Tonight's going to be a little more fun. But we do have one serious thing, so I thought we'd get it out of the way first. Our president, Raphael Reif, couldn't be here tonight, but Provost Marty Schmidt has a letter from Raphael that he'd like to read to get things started. Please welcome Marty Schmidt.
Vanu, thanks. Raphael writes a lot better than I speak, Al, so this is much better. As Vanu said, Raphael wasn't able to join us this evening, but he did write a letter to Al on this occasion, and he invited me to read it to the audience, so let me do that. October 22nd, 2017, Dear Al, I'm thrilled that EECS has organized a celebration of your 80th birthday and delighted to join you, at least in spirit. By the time I arrived on campus in 1980, you were already widely respected as a thoughtful EECS citizen, an outstanding educator, and a wise advisor. I quickly learned why. Your commitment to teaching is, in a word, legendary. You're known for pushing your students to dig deeper, to take risks, and explore new ways of thinking. Giving bold direction only works, of course, if you have credibility, and you have always had it in spades. You wrote the book on digital signal processing, and if you win one more award for excellence in teaching, your trophy case will emit an audible groan. It only makes sense that inspiring those around you comes so naturally. As an advisee and teaching assistant to Amar Bose, you learn the value of asking interesting, complicated, important questions, and you saw firsthand that skilled teachers can change the lives of those closest to them and influence generations of thinkers and doers who follow. I'm grateful that you continue to honor Amar's legacy, encouraging your faculty colleagues to explore new fields of research through the Bose Scholars Program. And I am in awe of the impact you've had on your former students, many of whom are with you today. Your dear friend would be enormously proud. I send my admiration and best wishes to you for a terrific celebration and a wonderful year ahead. On behalf of all of MIT, happy birthday.
Thank you, Marty. So to set the right mood, we're actually going to start with a game that's going to test your knowledge of Al and things that Al says. To run the game, I'm going to ask Yonina Elder to come up and join us. A word about Yonina. She, a couple years ago, I had a problem I was working on that involved something with sampling theory. So of course I went and asked Al. And he said, well, you got to read Yonina's book. So I got it on Amazon. all I can say is I had no idea it was possible to say that much about sampling theory. What, Janina?
You have to read it sub Nyquist, then it's much quicker. Okay, so good evening, everyone. We're shortly going to hear some of Al's lifelong students speak about their experiences as being Al's student, and I am not going to do that. I have the fun part. But as a proud member of that club, being one of Al's descendants, over the years in countless situations, when I faced a challenge or a dilemma or a problem, I would sit there thinking about what to do, and then there would be Al's voice guiding me, suggesting one of his famous quotes would pop up, and that would really kind of steer me and guide me in the right direction. So I thought it was only me that hears kind of voices in my head, but as we were putting this event together, it was fun to discover that actually a lot of us sitting in this room have the same voices in our head and share many of the same quotes and mantras. So what we thought would be fun before we start with the speakers and maybe the more slightly serious part of the event was to play a game and see just how many of you share these mantras and know some of Al's famous quotes. Okay? So we're going to play a game. Everybody has to participate. Okay? There's no winners, so it's not competitive, just fun. And what we're going to do in this game is I'm going to show part of some of Al's quotes, okay? So we're only going to see some of the words, and whoever knows the rest of the quote, just get up and yell it, okay? The more people yelling, the better and the more fun. Okay, everybody get the game? Very easy. All right, so let the fun begin. Anything's optimum if you correctly. Very good, okay. If you pick the error criterion correctly. Okay, next one. Don't forget your... Very good. Lucky socks. If anybody has amendments or corrections to the quotes, you could take it with Al. You can paint percent of a room in percent of the time. Okay, one call is 80-20. Let's take another. 90-10, okay, should we vote on that? 90-10. Very good. Okay, one more. Did you ever imagine how smart a is? Very good. Okay, bowling ball. When in doubt? Very good. Okay, you guys are terrific players. So the go skiing doesn't work so well in Israel, but very good. What? Whoever, like I said, whoever wants to argue the quotes could take that on with Al after. Okay, so let me just end, and this will actually be a full quote. So let me end with the full quote from Al, which I think summarizes a lot of what we all learned from Al. The role of a magician is to make simple things appear mysterious. The role of a teacher is to make mysterious things appear simple. So thank you, Al, from all of us, your former students, for teaching us the magic and simplicity of signal processing.
Excellent. Thank you, Janina. All right, I think you guys are in the right mood now. So we've divided the speakers into two groups. The before dinner speakers are students of Al's. My dad always said that when he went to graduation, he could always pick out his graduate students' parents because he knew the students so well he could know what the parents were. So I thought we'd reverse it here, and you can learn from the students to learn more about Al. So our first speaker, even if you don't know him, I'm pretty sure you know of him because I'm guessing everybody in this room has a copy of Oppenheim and Schaefer. So Ron was Al's first PhD student. He and Al have actually co-authored 4 textbooks together in the DSP area. After 6 years of research at Bell Telephone Labs, he was a professor at Georgia Tech for 30 years, retiring in 2004. So Al, how does it feel to have a student who's retired? But to be fair to Ron, he didn't really retire. He moved to California, worked as an HP Lab fellow for 8 years, and today he's an adjunct professor at Stanford teaching, guess what? DSP. Please welcome Ron Schaefer.
Well, thank you, Banu. It's sort of interesting that previous speakers have almost said what I wanted to say about Al, but I'm going to say it again, reasoning that you need to hear it more than one time. If we're lucky, at least one great teacher will come along and at just the right time and in our lives and inspire and push us on to success and fulfillment. I'm sure that's true of everybody in this room. I've been lucky in that I've had lots of great teachers, 3 of whom were MIT faculty members. One of them is, of course, Al Oppenheim. The other 2 were Amar Bose and Tom Stockham. There's a fine web of connections between these 3 people, and I was lucky enough to stumble into it. As a student at the University of Nebraska, I decided I wanted to be an electrical engineering teacher. And I was already married to Dorothy, whose father was a professor at the university, as we called it. And he advised me to get a PhD degree from the best school that would admit me. And to my delight, MIT accepted me. So in 1963, we loaded up our car, drove to Boston, and moved into number 802 of the Westgate Tower, which was just open. My first assignment as a TA was in 601, linear circuits, with Amar Bose in charge. His inspiring lectures were truly a work of art. And over the years, I've tried to emulate him in those kinds of things, but never achieved his grasp of the subject, his depth of insight, and his compelling style of lecturing. Al was a recitation instructor in Amar's courses, and I don't know whether he was in the course at the time I was a TA, but I have to believe that that course, which had a huge staff, was one of the greatest courses ever given at MIT. Now, Tom Stockham was a dynamic and inspiring teacher also. He'd worked with Amar in some of the early loudspeaker experiments. I'd taken his graduate course 655 in my first semester, and to my surprise, he asked me to take over his course the next year. I agreed to do it even though the qualifying exam was looming over my head. And I, of course, failed the qualifying exam the first time, passed it the second time, but by that time I was struggling to find a good research problem to fit my interests. So I went to Tom Stockham for advice, hoping I could work with him. He said he was leaving MIT for Lincoln Labs, but he and I should talk to his good friend Al Oppenheim about homomorphic systems. In our meeting, we talked about Al's generalized linear system theory, which he had developed under Amar's guidance, and about the recent dramatic disclosure of the FFT, and about the many new signal processing things that could be done with these developments. So I was sold, and he agreed to take me on as his first doctoral student, even though I was sort of marginal, I'd say. Wouldn't have made the cut later on. But he was an enthusiastic young assistant professor. As Banu has mentioned, he had lots of new ideas and a willingness to work with an eager but naive graduate student who needed to learn to do research. So thus began one of the great periods of my life. I had a loving wife and 2 small boys for support and comfort, and I was doing my doctoral work in a new field with a professor who was more colleague than supervisor. We had a wonderful time exploring the new field of DSP together. I look forward to our weekly meetings in his small office in beautiful Building 20. And as is typical with Al, our meetings always produce more new questions than answers. The work went well, and finally he agreed that I had done enough to write a dissertation. So teaching jobs were scarce in 1967. I got a couple of unexciting offers, but Al had recommended me to Jim Flanagan at Bell Laboratories. And I was invited to Murray Hill for an interview, which led to a MTS position in research. It wasn't teaching, but I soon realized that I could learn an awful lot from people like Jim Flanagan and Larry Rabiner. And I have Al to thank for sending me in that direction. Without his guidance and support, I never would have had that part of my life. Now, around 1972, Al had been teaching and writing notes for his DSP course and was looking to publish them. Ben Gold and Charlie Rader had written the pioneering book on DSP, but we were learning new things at a rapid rate, and there was a need for a textbook with problems and examples. Al asked me if I would like to work with him to turn his notes into a book, and I jumped at the chance. Then our relationship moved to a different plane. The road to publication had a few bumps. However, as an intense New Yorker on sabbatical in France and a procrastinating Nebraska boy with a full-time job learned to work together by using a communication system consisting of sending an audio cassette back and forth. By mail. Even though I worked for AT&T, lengthy overseas phone calls were frowned upon in 1973. You may remember that, some of you, that phone calls used to cost a lot of money. The cassette ended up in Al's hands, and he kept it and presented it to me on my retirement from Georgia Tech. It's a cherished memento in a steel frame. He made it so I couldn't get it open. So I can't get it out and play it, even if I wanted to. But I recall that there were a few harsh words on both sides of that tape. About such things as missed deadlines and so forth. However, it was a really very civilized communication system compared to email, because you had plenty of time to cool off between communications. I dread what it would have been like to have email at that time. We'd have been getting emails every day. So things smoothed out, and we became much closer friends after Dorothy and I spent several memorable days with Al and Phyllis in Grenoble and on a road trip to Erlangen. Fortunately, our ideas have always lined up very well about how to explore the ideas of DSP with students. And so I'm very grateful for that. The Orange Book was published in 1975, and we went on from there. In 1985, DSP had advanced so rapidly that we decided to spend the summer together at the Woods Hole Oceanographic Institute, where Al spent every summer for many years. Now, we managed to get a good start on the book, even though Al was frequently checking the windsurf conditions, and I kept a watchful eye for bluefish off the Hui Dock. Al and I have done several editions of that second book, and I'm glad to say that we're still friends, aren't we? Okay. So Al, I'm glad that you were there when I needed a boost. You provided it as every teacher should. And I want to thank you for your inspiration, support, and friendship over more than 50 years. Can you believe that? You've had a huge impact on my life and on the lives of your other students, and incidentally on the careers of countless engineers around the world who've learned about DSP from your books and videos. So congratulations on your impending birthday. I'm coming close behind, as you know. But if we find out tomorrow that DSP is not dead, let's go for a 4th edition.
Ron, I want to personally thank you. You made me feel a lot better because I flunked my qualifying exam the first time too. So our next speaker, I think, has more connections to various people in this room than any of the others. Andrew Russell graduated from the DSP group in 2002. While he was there, he interned at Bose Corporation and then for a small startup called Vanu. Since then, he's worked at TI and the DLP group, then at a microdisplay startup called Syndiant, and he finally moved to California to work at Google 4 years ago. But his connections don't stop there. While he was in the group, his wife Wendy also worked in the group as an administrative assistant for Greg Warnell. Andrew and Wendy now have 3 children, all adopted from China, Tracy, Terry, and Tyler. Please join me in welcoming Andrew Russell.
Thanks, Banu. I just want to give what the kids are calling nowadays a big out shout to Al. A big, is that, oh, what, wait, shout out? I'm sorry, shout out, my bad. A big shout out to Al. I met Al when I was a junior at MIT. I was taking 6011. My hairstyle at the time was orange, purple polka dots, dreadlocks on top. I was not doing well in my courses that semester because, frankly, I was neglecting to do the problem sets. I did not know how to manage my time well. I hardly slept. You see, I was missing my long-distance girlfriend, Wendy, and I felt lost and directionless. So I went to one of Al's office hours to ask him if I was going to fail the class so I could figure out if I should drop it. Al was probably annoyed, but didn't show it. But he told me if I aced the final, if I aced the final, he would give me an A. I thought it was just me. Apparently, that's true for everybody. So I decided not to drop the class, but I didn't ace the final. I got a B minus, which, by the way, was the highest grade I got that semester. I think I saw Professor Sodini here. His class, I ended up getting a C or C minus, I think, that semester. Sorry. There was something different about the way Al ran his courses. For example, when you do an exam in one of Al's courses and you finish and turn it in, and you walk out the room, there's a TA waiting there handing you a copy of the solutions. That's true. No other class I've ever taken has that happened, but I stole that. So when I taught at a university in Jamaica for 2 years, I stole that trick, Al. Sorry about that. Did anyone else in here steal tricks like that from Al? Anyone? Yes. Yes, a few hands. Okay. Al taught us that there's always a better way. Not just better than what other people did, but better than what you did the previous semester. A couple of years later, I took 6341, but this time I was well-groomed, I was getting enough sleep. You see, I had married Wendy, and she had moved up to live at MIT with me. Things were a lot better. I was doing the one-year MEng program, and I planned to leave MIT after that. I did very well in 6341, and near the end of the semester, Al asked me if I was applying to the PhD program. I told him no. He said that I should consider doing that, and at least I should take the PWE. So I was like, okay, I'll do that. I had no idea what a PWE was. Al changed the course of my life with one question. And I'll bet there's many people here who can say the same. I remember how good it felt to have MIT Professor Al Oppenheim believe in me and think that I was great. I felt powerful, invincible, and that feeling made everything else I did easier. Those were fun times. Al was experimenting. He held creativity group discussions. I don't know who, Charles was there. Yeah, many others were there. Where each student led a discussion on something that would help us with our creativity, help us be more creative. Al taught us meditation. I don't know who remembers that. We even had this religious cross-fertilization discussion group where students from different religions shared their beliefs and experiences. I mean, it was truly magical, something I've never seen anywhere else. He also tried to add a touch of magic to his lectures. I mean, literal magic. I don't know if you guys have ever seen it. Like rabbit hat kind of stuff. It inspired me to try pulling a magic trick on Al involving a fake mustache and a wig. Ask me about it later. I'll tell you about it. Okay. Yeah, Al might talk about it. Okay. Then it came time for me to graduate. But I had to write my thesis first. Al said he didn't think I could get it done in time to graduate that semester. He even bet me money that I couldn't do it. He bet a lot of money on this. I was devastated. This man who once believed in me no longer did. It hurt. But I decided I was going to win that bet. And I did. And I have the $3 here to prove it. Here it is. Al always seemed to know the perfect thing to say to get me to do what I needed to do. I learned a lot of lessons from Al. I probably only internalized half of them. For example, work hard, play hard. I internalized the second half of that one. About 3 years ago, I was adopting 2 kids. I was going to become a dad for the first time. And I got some really great parenting advice from Al. I've learned so many things. Like when Al once shared that he gets nervous before lectures. I learned that it was okay to be human. Or when he recommended the book Tuesdays with Maury, I learned that it wasn't just me who had a longing to absorb some wisdom from a mentor. I saw that Al wanted to pass on some of himself. He wanted to make a difference in the lives of his students. Well, Al, you certainly did. I believe I speak for many in the room when I say with the utmost sincerity, thank you, Al. Thank you. We are truly grateful.
Thank you, Andrew. So our next speaker will be the last one before dinner, and we'll take a break, and you can all resume your conversations I interrupted. This last one's a different kind of student. I can tell you from personal experience that when you are the child of a faculty member, you're also a student of that faculty member, whether or not you want to be. So I'd like to introduce Al's student of 38 years and counting, Jason Oppenheim.
It is very overwhelming to look out at all these different people from very different parts of his life who he has had a very strong impact on. For me, I can explain to you and give you a little bit of an insight to what he was like as a father and now as one of my closest friends. For some of you, he was a teacher or is a teacher. For some, a friend, windsurfing buddy, coworker, or even a magician, whether or not you wanted to pick a card. For me, he is a father as well as one of my closest friends. As we all share our experiences, have shared and will continue to share, I'm going to give you some examples of what he was like as a father. So when thinking about what to talk about for this event, my sister and I, came up with 2 examples of our childhood that we remember that kind of exemplify a little bit about what he was like. One of them was that we could only have 1 Coke when we went to dinner. Didn't matter how quickly we drank the first one, whether or not we were going to split it or went and got it on our own, we could only have 1 Coke. So tonight, I think I'll have 3. Another is, and I remember this distinctly, having to get to the airport for domestic flights roughly 4 hours early, just so that we can prepare for all the possible what-ifs. He still does that, and my sister and I now just meet him there. So this is the part where, yes, we were all students of his, whether or not we wanted to be. So when I was in either middle school and high school, I can remember being very conflicted about going to him for homework help, especially with math. I did not inherit his innate mathematical abilities. So when I would go to him, I would know that I would be able to get guided toward the right answer, but it would often take a lot longer than I thought it would. I wanted just the answer. What I got was how to use a slide rule, explanation of the history of numbers, mathematical, theoretical explanations of basically anything, and they often went way past the answer. But what had originally frustrated me turns out to have been a very important lesson. Understanding why something is the answer is far more important than just being able to get the right answer itself. It gives you control over the idea, and it gives you the ability to use it in different ways. Oftentimes, I find myself quoting him both to my patients, I'm a clinical psychologist, and to friends, or even back to him when he's come to me for advice. And the more I find myself acting like him, initially that was difficult, but I find myself considering myself lucky to become more like you. If we all do turn into our parents eventually, I have a great road ahead of me and a lot to look forward to. When putting down my thoughts for this speech, I took a page out of his book. I wrote initially a draft, then put it away for a while, let myself kind of marinate on it, think about what I really wanted to say, and then come back to it and revisit it over and over. And even actually yesterday, I talked to you about being very nervous about standing up in front of all these people to give this speech. And his solution was, ironically, my solution, which was to take it, write it, and then highlight certain parts that you wanted to not forget. So it was good advice. Oftentimes when I'm trying to solve a problem or I have a decision that I'm not sure of how to get to the answer, I'll call you. Not for fatherly advice, not anymore, but as the advice of a wise friend. For me, you have always been someone who can help me separate out the best answer from the answer that I want to be the right answer. For those of you who don't know, my father, sister, and I enjoy traveling together on bike trips. Some of the ones where he gets to the airport much earlier than we do. Even when we went to Portugal last month, my sister and I almost missed the flight, and he was in the lounge waiting for us. These times together have really given me and my sister memories that we'll cherish for the rest of our lives. So many people take for granted that they'll have another day or even another year with people that they love, but you really don't know. I can only hope that if I'm able to reach your age, which I would be very lucky to do, I can live life with the same level of energy and zeal for life that you do. Some people say those who can't do teach, or those who can't teach do. You do both. Aside from being a very wise and rational man, there is a man who loves his family very much. You are a father who has shown your commitment to me, my sister, and our mother in very many ways, and as well as other people who are in his life. For me, this commitment takes two forms. One, in the strong friendship that we have, and also in the form of a watch that you gave me when I was a teenager. You wanted me to know that without a doubt, that you loved me and you were committed to your role as being my father and as well as a friend. On the back of the watch, there's an engraving, and I know you know what I'm about to say, which is, to Jason from Dad with love and commitment. And as I've heard people so far talking about their experiences with him, that commitment and that love and that value that he puts in other people is very strong. You always wanted me to carry that message with me. It was a pivotal time in our friendship, which was able to move us from the point at which I'm telling you, you can't tell me what to do, like when I was 18, and your answer to me was, no, I can't. So what I wanted to say is thank you for being a wonderful and loving father as well as a friend. As I look out into this room, I can see the many lives that you have impacted, not just the people who are here, but all the people who aren't able to be here, and the people in here have impacted, and that ripple effect will continue throughout time. Your impact on people will last forever and benefit so many people in so many different ways. So if you would, I don't have a glass, but you all do, if you would raise the glass and show our appreciation for who this man is, who he has helped all of us become, and for making almost 80 years look so easy. Cheers. I love you too. So unfortunately, my sister Justine isn't able to be here. She's training to fly the Dreamliners, and so she wasn't able to be here, but I mean, last minute, she did send me some notes to read for you. So I'm just going to read it basically verbatim. Hello, everyone. I'm sorry to miss this momentous occasion and wish I could be there to celebrate both my father's retirement and his 80th birthday. Wow, 8-0. That's, never mind, I digress. I would like to thank everyone here for taking the time to celebrate with my father, as I know it means a lot to him. It's really great that all of you could be here. My father always described having children as both agony and ecstasy. I think this also applies from the perspective of a child. And so I would like to speak to this with a few anecdotes. He taught us some life lessons, at least what to a young child's perspective were tough lessons. We were limited to one soda, like I said. We both came up with this idea when we went out to eat, and I'm sure that as former students can kind of relate to the ban on food truck food in his class. I think it was just one food truck, or two, yeah. Yeah. There was a time when I learned what counting to 5 means, or at least getting to 5. The agony of seeing my brand new hockey stick broke in 2 over my father's knee. I cannot recall exactly what I was doing, but I remember, so I'll tell you. So we were at our friend Hillary's house, and she and Hillary were playing, and I think I must have been watching because I'm about 4.5 years younger than her. And my dad said that we need to go. He said it a couple times. And then eventually he said, I'm going to count to 5, and if I get to 5 and we're not leaving, then I'm going to have to break your hockey stick. And he counted to 5. She tested him, as she still does. And Hillary's father turned to my dad and said, now you have to do it. Right? Now you actually have to do it. I don't remember what happened after that. My brother spoke to this as well, but I figured that having an MIT professor for a dad would make my math homework trivial. It was far from that. I wanted the answer, just like I did, and he wanted to give me a course on algebra, geometry, or whatever it was. Just out of curiosity, can I have a show of hands of who has heard the words pick a card? Yeah. Yeah, the phrase was heard a lot growing up, as was when you would juggle. I remember when you were in your juggling phase. And we served as practice for these card tricks. Of course, I joke about these things, but I'm grateful for the adventures that we have shared and those moments of ecstasy. My father is always there to encourage my participation in sports, be it teaching me to ski or windsurf, someone to shoot baskets with, or drive me to endless soccer practices and games. After my favorite trips with him were the Baja Challenge cars that you did in Mexico, through the Baja Peninsula, or flying in a 172, to him accompanying me on a flight to Edinburgh, Scotland. The various bike trips, and the list goes on. He was always there to listen and willing to offer advice whether or not we asked, but always because he cares. I always remember coming with him to MIT throughout my childhood, and it was always fun to meet and interact with all the various students in the DSP group. Through the decades of teaching, the one thing that stands out to me is his ability to mentor, the lasting impact and friendships that he has created with his colleagues, friends, and students. I am thankful to have such a dedicated, hard-working, loving father. This is from her directly. So, Dad, I look forward to many more moments of both agony and ecstasy, although I obviously hope the ecstasy outweighs the agony. Wishing you a very happy retirement, although I don't think it's in your DNA to fully retire, and a very happy 80th birthday. Love, Justine.
Happy birthday to Happy birthday to you.
All right. So that's our cue to get the after dinner part of the show started while dessert's being served. So our next three speakers, as I said, are going to be talking about aspects of Al's life that have nothing to do with teaching or signal processing or all that other stuff. So you're going to learn about some different aspects of Al's life. My hope is that everybody learns something new about Al here. So the first speaker we have is talking about a different aspect of Al's life. Now, most people think about Al, they think about DSP. You think about DSP, you think about Al. So when my daughter was 5, I told her that Al was coming over for dinner. And she kind of screwed up her face and looked at me in the way that kids do when they're trying to figure something out. And finally she said, "Do you mean Uncle Al the magician?" So that is the topic that our next speaker will talk about. Joel Acevedo is a computer engineer from Puerto Rico. After finishing graduate studies at the University of Michigan, he moved to Massachusetts, where for the past 9 years he's been working at the Human Language Technology Group at MIT Lincoln Laboratory. Joel is also a magician by training and the producer of an ongoing magic show in Boston called The Four-Handed Illusions. He will explain how these two facets of his life, engineering and magic, contributed to meeting Al. Joel?
Thank you so much for the introduction. So I am going to try to keep it brief, but I have 3 pages of notes, so freshen up your drinks. Good evening. Thank you, Vanu, for the introduction. I dislike talking about myself, so I appreciate Vanu doing that for me. I thought it would be important everybody knew a little bit about me, as context for the circumstances that led me to meeting Al. In general, I think circumstances surrounding people tell a lot about who they are. That is particularly true when it comes to Al and I. Back in 2014, and I had to look this up, it was back in 2014, I got an email from Al. He had heard from Tom Quattieri, a colleague of mine at Lincoln Lab, and Al's former PhD student, that I was a magician. What the exact conversation was that led to that seemingly insignificant fact about me, I don't know. It's still a mystery. What I do know is that Tom is responsible for putting us in contact. In his email, Al mentioned that he had just returned from a magic convention. Yes, that's a thing. And that he was looking for someone locally who would help him develop some real skill in the art of magic. Get this. Al Oppenheim, the Al Oppenheim, the legendary Al Oppenheim, was looking for a magic teacher. Even though there were a few concerns that gave me pause, more on that later, I decided to meet with him and discuss the possibility of becoming his magic mentor. He asked about compensation in the email, but what would I charge him? I wanted to make it worth my while, but at the same time, I didn't want the money to scare him away. I could tell that if the enthusiasm poured in the email was indeed real, teaching him magic would make me a better magician. Also, it occurred to me that the most valuable thing I could get from Al was not money, but a piece of the knowledge and insight acquired through his years of experience and study. So I thought of a bold idea. A barter. I would teach Al magic if he taught me signal processing. I suggested the unusual exchange to Al when he asked about what my fee would be. He didn't miss a bit and accepted. That was the first of many sessions we have had over the past 3 years. We meet in Cambridge about once a month or so for 2, 3, 4, sometimes even 5 hours. Half of that time, we talk about magic, and I am the instructor. For the other half, we talk about signal processing, and he is the instructor, making me one of the few people, if not the only one in the whole world, who is both Al's mentor and student on the same day. As I mentioned, there were a few things giving me pause about these meetings. From a student standpoint, well, I wasn't sure I had the time to study and reciprocate Al's teaching with the appropriate understanding of the subject. Al immediately took care of it by establishing a simple rule. We would only carry our sessions as long as it was fun, beneficial, and didn't get in the way of our jobs and priorities. I thought he was being extremely generous to me, but after some time I realized that he was also shielding himself. It's funny to see how our roles change from teacher to apprentice, and it always starts the same no matter who is the apprentice at that point. Well, I thought I had more time to work on this, but this is what I have. That rule, got me more excited about working with someone like Al. That said, from a teacher's standpoint, well, I had some concerns as well. I am very picky, just like Al, when it comes to choosing my students. As a matter of fact, I have 3 rules. And if these 3 rules sound familiar to you, it's because you have been a student of Al's. First rule, the student must be intelligent. I know what some of you are thinking. How dare you, question the intelligence of Al Oppenheim? Well, I'm a firm believer in the fact that there's different types of intelligence. And if you don't know what I'm talking about, put me and some of my colleagues at Lincoln Lab on a basketball court. You will see exactly what I mean. And the fact that, intelligence in math, science, and engineering doesn't necessarily transfer well to the world of hand-eye coordination. It took me very little, though, to realize that Al is intelligent in that context as well. He has the hand and eye coordination that you need to do good magic, to perform good magic. Second rule, the person must be someone I would like to have a glass of wine with. In the case of Al, a beer with. Al is that kind of person. We actually have sat many times together with a glass of wine or a beer and have a very interesting, stimulating conversation every single time. Fun conversation as well. Third rule, the student must be coachable. I have taught professionals in other contexts, and one of the most painful things is to see how difficult it is for a professional adult to become a beginner again. Al is not afraid of being a beginner. He recognizes that knowing where you are and asking the right questions is the path to mastery. In fact, sometimes he asks too many questions. But I'm okay with that because I ask a lot of questions too. On that respect, it is said that one of the reasons why we get less creative as we grow older is because somewhere along the line, we stop asking questions. As I said, Al hasn't stopped asking questions. In my experience, good questions about life, the people that surrounds him, and magic. That is one of the biggest lessons I have gotten from Al, and one I will always carry with me for the rest of my life. No matter how much you know or how much you have achieved, you should nurture and exercise your intellectual curiosity. I should clarify, those are actually Al's rules for choosing his students. I just blatantly stole those rules from him. I did have those rules myself, I just didn't know I had them until I met him. I could talk a lot about Al, but as I said, I'm going to try to keep it brief. So I'm going to summarize it like such. Al, I feel very fortunate and very honored that our paths have crossed. And to be able to call you my student, my mentor, and my friend. Here's to many more magic and signal processing sessions together. Cheers.
Thank you, Joel. So another aspect of Al's life. Our next speaker is Pat Downs. He's a signal processor from San Diego. In 1983, he went to hear Al talk about Hankel transforms, but they ended up talking about the weather. Please welcome Pat Downs.
Thanks, Vanu. Hi, Al. So I met Al in 1983 when he was on sabbatical in San Diego and had an office at Scripps Institution of Oceanography where I was working. I was excited to meet him because I had learned from his books and was inspired by them. So I was preparing to go to the first lecture that he had. I was armed with another piece of information. A fellow windsurfer at Scripps, Keir Becker, had met Al at the windsurfing beach, so I knew Al was a windsurfer. So I went to his talk, and it was everything that I expected. He presented this complex topic in a very clear way. He was the professor that I always imagined, just very confident, very serious, but approachable. So after his talk, I approached him and introduced myself and said, "I hear you're a windsurfer." And in an instant, he transformed from Professor Alan Oppenheim to Al the windsurfer. His face lit up like a kid at his own birthday party, kind of like that. And I think he put his arm on me, he said, "This is important." And so we walked out on the balcony of this conference room at Scripps, and it was a beautiful setting. You look out over the Pacific Ocean, and we looked for whitecaps, which is the indication that you can sail. So windsurfing at the time was a relatively young sport, and it was evolving very rapidly. What had started as longboards and flat water sailing was becoming shorter boards and sailing in the waves. And it turned out that Al and I had exactly the same board, the Windsurfer Rocket 99, which was a short board for the time. And the sport was evolving very rapidly. And so there was a steep learning curve. There were guys in Hawaii doing just outrageously crazy things. And so there was always something new to learn. And it turns out that Al and I were kind of on the same place in the learning curve. So maybe it's a unique thing. I was a student with Al, and we were learning the same moves in windsurfing. And it was a wonderful thing. He, not surprisingly, he was a good student. He worked really hard at windsurfing. So we had many great days of sailing. Now, San Diego is a light wind community, so you can't just go windsurfing anytime you want. You'd rely on thermal winds in the afternoon that wouldn't be that reliable. And so to be a serious windsurfer, you had to keep some flexibility in your afternoon schedule. And so there'd be many times we'd go down to the beach, wait for the wind to come up because you had to be prepared. And there's kind of a funny story. One of the first few times that we went out, I called over to his office. He also had an office at Linkabit, and I called over there and asked for Al. His secretary said, "Al's not here." And I said, "Oh, is he out windsurfing?" And she had yet to learn, I think, Al's habits and personality. And I think she was trying to cover for him because she said something like, "Oh, no, he's doing something much more important than that." And I think he was actually out windsurfing that day. So we ended up, after the sabbatical, taking many trips to places with much more reliable winds, down to islands in the Caribbean, where you could always count on wind, except for the one time when we were skunked, I think, in Margarita. And so one aspect of windsurfing is that you spend some time on the water. but you spend a lot of time waiting for the wind to come up, and then you spend a lot of time after sailing talking about how great a day it was. And so we spent many hours doing that and talking about all sorts of things, technical things, personal things, talking about the weather. And it developed into a wonderful friendship that I very much value, and I'm so delighted to be here celebrating it with you. So happy birthday, Al. All right.
So, as you can guess, trying to select just a handful of people to speak from all the interesting people, it was quite a challenge. And so I tried to think about, well, if I had an 80th birthday, who would I least want to speak at my 80th birthday? And the answer came, well, have to be one of your fraternity brothers. So I'd like to introduce Al's fraternity brother, who joined Sigma Alpha Mu in the second term as a freshman when Al was a senior, and he still doesn't understand why Al took a liking to him. Please welcome Art Sandberg.
Thanks, Vanu, and also thanks for stealing my comments. But it's truth. I knew Al when I don't even think Al knew what digital signal processing was. Or did you? Maybe you did at that point. No, I sure as hell didn't. And if you look at the genealogy chart downstairs, you will not find my name. I was what is called, excuse me, what is commonly referred to as a C student. And as a good friend of mine once said, it's the C students who get their names here, except for Ray, who was quite different. So Al's older than I am. I'm a youngster. Al was in SAMI. SAMI nobody knows anymore because I think it disbanded about 10 years after I got out and was called something else. But in its day, it was really quite a special fraternity house. It was phenomenal. There were lots and lots of great people who came out of it. My friend Murray Sachs, who was here earlier, Al and I are still friendly with him. He ran biomedical engineering at Hopkins for 17 years. My good friend Ed Lindy, who started Boston Properties. Steve Tannenbaum was there. Leon Bornstein, who came up with me today. We really had a terrific house. And there was a lot of strong personalities, a lot of strong intellects. But somehow, as a young guy who really was a C student, I gravitated to Al. I never understood why he gravitated to me. But I could have predicted that he would be a great teacher at this place as a freshman and a sophomore. And I needed all the teachers I could find. He's just a sweet person, as you all know. And when I say I'm really not sure why I'm here, I'm really not sure I'm here because I really can't think of any nasty insights that would spice this up. I'm thinking as hard as I can. He truly is not one of those guys. And believe me, as Raphael and Marty and everybody else says, I love to stir it up. I can't. He's just a special, special person. So, Al, thanks for having me here, and congratulations on a great career and a big birthday.
Well, thanks, Art. That was really disappointing. So we just have a couple things left on the formal program, but before we do that, I'm going to take the executive privilege of being MC and share a personal note about Al. As Raphael mentioned in his letter, Al has helped create the Bose Fellows Program. It's a research grant program we run with part of the gift that my dad left to MIT. And in a nutshell, we're trying to be very different. We're trying to fund the things that other people won't. Either they don't fit into somebody's funding pipeline, or they're too early, or frankly, they're just too far out of the box. And that's really the only criteria. And we get about 100 of these a year, and Al spends time going through all of them to help me sort these out. And Al, I have to say, the one thing I really, really look forward to every year is the afternoon we spend together going through these crazy ideas, trying to figure out what we're going to do. I really enjoy it. I want to thank you for the time you spent on the program, for helping build this legacy for my dad, and thank you for the time you spend with me. So, just a couple more things. Now, I don't know if you all got to see it downstairs. We had a printout about this big, which was Al's academic genealogy tree. So, you know, what this is all of his students, all his PhD students, and all their PhD students, and so on and so on. And there's a site, the Math Genealogy Project, where you can go and look this up. So Tom and Petros did a lot of work here. Petros, who's in the back there, who wrestled with the graphics program to make it presentable because it was a challenge, because Al has about 330 academic descendants. Now, let me put this in perspective for you. My dad has about 350. 330 of those are Al's. So Al, what we'd wanted to do was get a smaller version framed for you to present as a gift, but then we quickly realized that we'd have to give you a microscope as well to read it. So I honestly don't know what you're going to do with this, but we went and got the big one mounted, and we'd like to present that to you now. So, as you can see, back here's your predecessors. My dad's up here. There's Al in the middle, and all these leaves of the tree are Al's students, or his students' students, or students' students' students. And a lot of the people in this room are on the chart. You should definitely come and take a look at it. Wow. We do have one small additional gift presented on behalf of your descendants. I think Yonina's here to make the presentation.
So Al, we're giving you also this, a Sharpie. This is just a partial list. It keeps on growing. You have descendants and descendants' descendants that keep on getting added. So this is for you, so that you can add all the
Well, it's been a wonderful evening. I want to thank all the speakers. I want to especially thank Jason. I know how hard it is talking about your dad in front of a lot of people. I thought you did a great job. There's really only one thing left to do. We got to hear from the birthday boy. Come on up, Al.
Wow. I mean, that's all I can really think of is wow. I mean, this event is just blowing me away. And I have to say that one of the things that's happened here as I was sort of watching the interaction is the biggest thing that I was hoping would happen, which is the connections and the reconnections and the new connections that I saw being made. And in the spirit of the whole event, which is really about the future of signal processing, those kinds of connections and collaborations are really what the future of signal processing is. So I want to emphasize how deeply touched I am by the importance that all of you have placed on being here to help me or share my birthday celebration. I know for many of you it meant a lot of traveling, and I am really deeply touched by what's happened and at this event. And You know, as I, as I thought about kind of what I was going to say, there was an image that kept popping into my mind. You know, there are a number of you that have traveled with me, Jason and Pat, and lots of other people who have been on trips with me. And one of the things that they will absolutely attest to is how easily I get lost. It's really true. And, you know, you go to a beautiful city, and particularly when you go into the old town, where there are meandering streets and you're passing fantastic landmarks, and you turn left, you turn right, and all of a sudden you don't know where you are, and then it opens out into a town square. And usually in the town square, there's a big map with all these landmarks and an asterisk. And of course, what the asterisk says is, "You are here." And that image just kept popping up in my mind as I thought about, I'm going to be looking out at a room with so many landmarks that's about how I got here. And so when I say here, I mean, I know I'm here. And when you see one of these maps or in a mall and you see the asterisk and it says "You are here," well, I know I'm here. But in the deeper sense, what I'm feeling and seeing is so many of the landmarks of how I got to this phenomenal sweet spot in my life. And here I am, almost 80, and I just feel like I am in an incredible sweet spot. And so then I start thinking about it. I think about, you know, I came to MIT in 1955, and pretty much by accident. And I joined the class of '59, or what we call the Great Class of '59, and I look out here at a number of my Great Class of '59 classmates, and there's Mike Drew, and there's Chuck Staples, and there's Al Kenyatzi, and there's Bill Widnall, and Sheila Widnall, who we've adopted into the class of 1959. She was actually the class of 1960. And I joined a fraternity, it was Sigma Alpha Mu, and I see a number of my Sigma Alpha Mu fraternity brothers, Art, who you heard from, and Leon Borstein, and Steve Tannenbaum, and I have to say that it was the fraternity and my classmates that made MIT really wonderful and tolerable for me, because MIT, as we all know, is a really, really intense place. And then you heard from my first PhD student, Ron Schaefer, and also co-author with me of my first book after he graduated. And as Ron was up here talking, there was this story, and I'm sure Dorothy remembers it, and I'm sure Ron remembers it, but you know, Ron and I were very excited about the research that we were doing together, and pretty much he had, at the tail end of his thesis, and I remember we were standing in the sort of like outside of, it's Westgate or Eastgate where you were living? And I said, Ron, I got this great idea. So let's maybe spend another semester and get that done. And he looked at me with a totally straight but serious face, and he said, Dorothy would never put up with that. So, you know, my whole academic career, I've had this incredible array of students that I've mentored and that I've collaborated with. You know, Ron was the first one. Actually, there's my current PhD student here, Catherine Medlock, who actually got a little worried at Jason's talk, because when Jason referred to, or maybe it was Justine, that this was a retirement party. Yeah. And I had to actually go over and reassure her, no, this is not a retirement event. In fact, I don't see myself ever retiring, and especially with such extraordinary students that MIT has. And in the whole, so there's kind of my thesis student bookends. There's Ron at one end, there's Catherine at the other end, there's this incredible array of master's and PhD students that I've had over the years, including some from what is, I guess I refer to as the best kept secret at MIT. The best kept secret at MIT is the program that John graduated from, and Doug Moak graduated from, and Hanu graduated from, and that's the MIT Woods Hole Joint Program, which is a phenomenal program. And I remember when I was talking to Doug Moak about joining the MIT Woods Hole program, he said to me, well, what are the requirements? And I said, well, let's see. You have to allow yourself to get exposed to some really, really interesting real-world problems. Not only that, but you have to spend at least 1 or 2 summers at one of the most beautiful places in the world, right near the beach, with summer housing provided for you. What do you think? And of course, he readily signed on to that, as a number of other Woods Hole students did. Now also here, when I think about kind of this map that, that surfaced in my mind, are so many of my extraordinary, really extraordinary MIT colleagues. There's colleagues that I've taught classes with. There are colleagues like, and I have to single them out, Anantha Chandrakasan, who was department head for many years, and let's see, we could tell stories about each other. We won't, Anantha. But just a wonderful array of colleagues that have made MIT and EUCS such a wonderful career home for me. And actually, I've co-authored several books with my MIT colleagues. There's the book that I co-authored with Al Wilsky. There's the book that I co-authored with George Verghese. And now the book with George, I think Ron commented about, you know, different styles that people have. And the book that George and I co-authored, we spent actually 20 years on. We started that course 20 years ago, and the book was finally published about 2 years ago. But actually, George and I decided that what was published actually was the 5th edition of the book, and the first 4 we just never published, right? And in terms of sort of very different styles, George is very much like Ron, very laid back. 2 of the most wonderful people I've ever known in my whole life. And on the other hand, I'm a belt and suspenders guy, and I'm very concerned about having everything kind of lined up. George, on the other hand, when I've taught with George, you know, I would have the last lecture prepared the first day of the semester, And George, if you don't mind my saying it, our nickname for George is Just-in-Time George. So when George would be giving a lecture on a Tuesday morning, and the lecture, let's say, is at 10 in the morning, George is still working on it at 3 in the morning, which is, but as Ron commented, and you know, people have said if you write a textbook with a friend, it's very hard to see that the friendship's going to last. Well, I can tell you that with George, with Al Wilsky, with Ron Schaefer, the books that we've written have truly deepened our friendship in so many ways as we work through all the tapes back and forth, emails back and forth, and things like that. So also, many of you probably know the story, which is a true story of about halfway through my freshman year at MIT, I wrote a letter home to my mother, and I said, at the end of this year, I'm getting out of here and going someplace that's fun. And that was literally true because I found MIT to be so intense, and I felt I was so tremendously outclassed, but in fact, it turned out to be a tremendous amount of fun because of the fraternity, because of my classmates, and so, you know, MIT is hard fun, but it's fun. Now, also in the other fun category, as you've heard, there are a number of people here from my recreational life. You heard from Pat. I can tell other stories about Pat. In fact, as Andrew Russell was talking, I could tell you stories about Andrew. I can tell you stories about everybody. In fact, I have in my office a big book about all the stories of about all of you. So, you know, you just want to be very careful. But it's wonderful to see so many people here from my recreational life of squash and flying and windsurfing and sailing. You know, speaking of sailing, there's Arthur and Jermaine Beiser at the table they're at, but I met them while I was a grad student, started sailing with them on their 60-foot catch. I was basically slave labor on that. And then spent decades and decades sailing with them at all kinds of wonderful places around the world, and a big part of my sort of fun life. And of course, and especially Nora, who I've shared many wonderful and fun adventures with over the years. So an entirely different category is family, and how that has shaped why and how I've arrived at this incredible sweet spot in my life. I truly wish it were possible for Phyllis to be here, which is not possible. Phyllis and I are blessed with two wonderful children. You heard from Jason, and there's our daughter, Justine. Justine arrived at JFK Airport, and Jason was delivered by the Stork at Mount Auburn Hospital. And, you know, I think those who know me really well know that I'm very spiritual, but I'm not religious. But the closest I've ever come in my life to believing in a divine being was the time when Justine arrived from Korea at Kennedy Airport, and I held her in my arms, And the second was when I watched Jason being delivered at Mount Auburn Hospital. And I can tell you that there were tears of joy and wonderment in both of those cases. It's extraordinary, and well, I think you got a sense of Jason, and the friendship that I have with Justine and Jason is something that I treasure, really treasure so deeply. And also in terms of family, I just want to mention the Weinstein family, which is a family, we first met in Woods Hole because Udi and I met there as friends, and then he got married, and then I have children, and their family has been so close to our family that they're actually closer than family. And that is really special. So I also want to mention some people who could not be here. One is my mother. My mother, all 4 feet 8 inches of her, about that high, was a truly extraordinary woman. She was a physician, head of public health in the borough of Staten Island in New York. And this was in an era when that's just not what women were supposed to do. She did a lot of things that women were just not supposed to do. And then there are my 3 most significant mentors. One of them is Vanu's dad, Amar Bose. Ben Gold is another, and Tom Stockham, who you also heard about from Ron. And one of the many things about the 3 of them, I also, of course, learned an enormous number of things from the 3 of them. But the 3 of them believed in me unconditionally at a time when I didn't believe in myself. And it was their deep belief in me that made everything happen to me, for me afterwards. And I can say that, and I think some of you have heard this metaphor before, that I have Amar and Ben and Tom Stockham perched on my shoulder, and I very often turn to them for advice, and they will whisper in my ear, and we will discuss it, and so they are always still with me. So they actually are here. They're certainly here as very much part of me. So I just want to say, to conclude, my deep thanks to all of you for sharing this really, really special and touching evening with me. I also want to express deep appreciation to Tom Barron, to Anantha, to Yonina, to Petros, for all the enormous effort that went into putting this event together, and not just for tonight, but even more importantly for tomorrow, because tomorrow is about the future of signal processing, and that future is, in my view, just beginning. I think there's a lot that you're going to hear tomorrow that's going to be very exciting. So let me just say thank you again. And by the way, this room was arranged so that we don't have to just bolt out of here so that they can clear the tables. We're able to stay here for a while and linger, anybody who wants to. So feel free to stay and linger, and we look forward to seeing many of you at the symposium tomorrow. And once again, thank you very much. This was such a heartwarming and touching evening. Thank you.